Chapter 2, Part 1. Then said Roland, Oliver, companion, brother, we shall have a strong and tough battle, such as man never saw fought. But I shall strike with my sword, and you, comrade, will strike with yours. We have borne our swords in so many lands, we have ended so many battles with them, that no evil song shall be sung of them. At these words the Franks went forward gladly. The Song of Roland. Let the reader now try to imagine the nature of the landing. In order to puzzle the Turkish commander, to make him hesitate and divide his forces, it was necessary to land or pretend to land in some force simultaneously at various places. A feint of landing was to be made near Boulaire. The French Corps Expeditionnaire was to land at Kumkale to attack and silence the Asiatic fortifications and batteries. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps was to land at or near Gaba Tepe, while men of the 29th and Royal Naval Divisions landed at or near Cape Helles, some towards Krithia on the north, others near Sed El Bahr on the southwest and south. The main attacks were to be those near Gaba Tepe and Cape Helles. At Cape Helles, 3 principal landings were to be made at the following places. 1. At Beach V, a small semicircular sandy bay, 300 yards across, just west of the ruins of Sed El Bahr Castle. The ground rises steeply round the half-circle of the bay, exactly as the seats rise in an amphitheater. Modern defense could not ask for a more perfect site. 2. At Beach W, to the west of V, where a small sandy bay under Cape Teki offered a landing upon a strip of sand about the size of Beach V. The slope upward from this beach is more gentle than at V, through a succession of sand dunes above which the ground was strongly entrenched. The cliffs north and south are precipitous and make the beach a kind of gully or ravine. The Turks had placed machine guns in holes in the cliff, had wired and mined both beach and bay, and thrown up strong redoubts to flank them. Beach W was a death trap. 3. At Beach X, north of W, on the other or northern side of Cape Teki, a narrow strip of sand, 200 yards long, at the foot of a low cliff. This, though too small to serve for the quick passage ashore of many men at a time, was a slightly easier landing place than the other 2, owing to the lie of the ground. Besides these main landings, 2 minor landings were to be made as follows. 4. At Beach S, a small beach within the straits beyond Sed El Bahr. 5. At Beach Y, on the Aegean to the west of Krithia, a strip of sand below a precipitous cliff gashed with steep, crumbling and scrub-covered gullies. These 2 minor landings were to protect the flanks of the main landing parties, to disseminate the forces of the enemy, and to interrupt the arrival of his reinforcements. They were to take place at dawn, at about 5 a.m. or half an hour before the main attacks, without any preliminary bombardment from the fleet upon the landing places. Near Gaba Tepe, only 1 landing was to be made, upon a small beach 200 yards across, a mile to the north of Gaba Tepe promontory. The ground beneath this beach is abrupt sandy cliff, covered with scrub, flanked by Gaba Tepe, and commanded by the land to shoreward. For some days before the landing, the army lay at Mudros in Lemnos, aboard its transports or engaged in tactical exercises ashore and in the harbor. Much bitter and ignorant criticism has been passed upon this delay, which was unfortunately very necessary. The month of April 1915 in the Aegean was a month of unusually unsettled weather. It was quite impossible to attempt the landing without calm water and the likelihood of fine weather for some days. In rough weather, it would have been impossible to land laden soldiers with their stores through the surf of open beaches under heavy fire, and those who maintained that other soldiers, i.e. themselves, would have made the attempt, can have no knowledge of what wading ashore from a boat in bad weather in the Aegean or any other sea, even without a pack and with no enemy ahead, is like. But in unsettled weather, the Gallipoli coast is not only difficult, but exceedingly dangerous for small vessels. The currents are fierce, and a short and ugly sea gets up quickly and makes towing hazardous. Had the attempt been made in foul weather, a great many men would have been drowned. Some few would have reached the shore, and then the ships would have been forced off the coast. The few men left on the shore would have had to fight there with neither supplies nor supports till the enemy overwhelmed them. Another reason for delay was the need for the most minute preparation. Many armies have been landed from boats from the time of Pharaoh's invasion of Punt until the present, but no men, not even Caesar's army of invasion in Britain, have had to land in an enemy's country with such a prospect of difficulty before them. They were going to land on a foodless cliff 500 miles from a store, in a place and at a season in which the seas rising might cut them from supply. They had to take with them all things: munitions, guns, entrenching tools, sandbags, provisions, clothing, medical stores, hospital equipment, mules, horses, fodder, even water to drink, for the land produced not even that. These military supplies had to be arranged in boats and lighters in such a way that they might be thrust ashore with many thousands of men in all haste, but without confusion. All this world of preparation, which made each unit landed a self-supporting army, took time and labor. How much can only be judged by those who have done similar work. On Friday, the 23rd of April, the weather cleared so that the work could be begun. In fine weather in Mudros, a haze of beauty comes upon the hills and water till their loveliness is unearthly, it is so rare. Then the bay is like a blue jewel, and the hills lose their savagery, and glow, and are gentle, and the sun comes up from Troy, and the peaks of Samothrace change color, and all the marvelous ships in the harbor are transfigured. The land of Lemnos was beautiful with flowers at that season, in the brief Aegean spring, and to seawards always, in the bay, were the ships, more ships, perhaps, than any port of modern times has known. They seemed like half the ships of the world. In this crowd of shipping, strange, beautiful Greek vessels passed, under rigs of old time, with sheep and goats and fish for sale, and the tugs of the Thames and Mersey met again the ships they had towed of old, bearing a new freight of human courage. The transports, all painted black, lay in tiers well within the harbor, the men of war near Mudros in the entrance. Now in all that city of ships, so busy with passing picket boats and noisy with the labor of men, the getting of the anchors began. Ship after ship, crammed with soldiers, moved slowly out of harbor in the lovely day and felt again the heave of the sea. No such gathering of fine ships has ever been seen upon this earth, and the beauty and the exultation of the youth upon them made them like sacred things as they moved away. All the thousands of men aboard them gathered on deck to see, till each rail was thronged. These men had come from all parts of the British world, from Africa, Australia, Canada, India, the mother country, New Zealand, and remote islands in the sea. They had said goodbye to home that they might offer their lives in the cause we stand for. In a few hours at most, as they well knew, perhaps a tenth of them would have looked their last on the sun and be a part of foreign earth or dumb things that the tides push. Many of them would have disappeared forever from the knowledge of man, blotted from the book of life none would know how, by a fall or chance shot in the darkness, in the blast of a shell, or alone like a hurt beast in some scrub or gully, far from comrades in the English speech and the English singing. And perhaps a third of them would be mangled, blinded or broken, lamed, made imbecile or disfigured, with the color and the taste of life taken from them, so that they would never more move with comrades nor exult in the sun. And those not taken thus would be under the ground, sweating in the trench, carrying sandbags up the sap, dodging death and danger, without rest or food or drink, in the blazing sun or the frost of the Gallipoli night, till death seemed relaxation and a wound a luxury. But as they moved out, these things were but the end they asked, the reward they had come for, the unseen cross upon the breast. All that they felt was a gladness of exultation that their young courage was to be used. They went like kings in a pageant to the imminent death. As they passed from moorings to the man-of-war anchorage on their way to the sea, their feeling that they had done with life and were going out to something new welled up in those battalions. They cheered and cheered till the harbor rang with cheering. As each ship, crammed with soldiers, drew near the battleships, the men swung their caps and cheered again, and the sailors answered, and the noise of cheering swelled, and the men in the ships not yet moving joined in, and the men ashore, till all the life in the harbor was giving thanks that it could go to death rejoicing. All was beautiful in that gladness of men about to die, but the most moving thing was the greatness of their generous hearts. As they passed the French ships, the memory of old quarrels healed, and the sense of what sacred France has done and endured in this great war, and the pride of having such men as the French for comrades, rose up in their warm souls, and they cheered the French ships more even than their own. They left the harbor very, very slowly. This tumult of cheering lasted a long time. No one who heard it will ever forget it or think of it unshaken. It broke the hearts of all there with pity and pride. It went beyond the guard of the English heart. Presently all were out, and the fleet stood across for Tenedos, and the sun went down with marvelous color, lighting island after island and the Asian peaks, and those left behind in Mudros trimmed their lamps, knowing that they had been for a little brought near to the heart of things. The next day, the 24th April, the troops of the landing parties went on board the warships and minesweepers which were to take them ashore. At midnight, the fleet got under way from Tenedos and stood out for the peninsula. Dawn was to be at 5. The landings on the flanks were to take place then, the others at 5:30, after the fleet had bombarded the beaches. Very few of the soldiers of the landing parties slept that night. The excitement of the morrow kept them awake, as happened to Nelson's sailors before Trafalgar. It was a very still, fine night, slightly hazy, with the sea so still that the ships had no trouble with their long tows of boats and launches. As it began to grow light, the men went down into the boats, and the two flanking parties started for the outer beaches S and Y. The guns of the fleet now opened a heavy fire upon the Turkish positions, and the big guns on the Asian shore sent over a few shell in answer. But the Turks near the landing places reserved their fire. During the intense bombardment by the fleet, when the ships were trembling like animals with the blasts of the explosions, the picket boats towing the lighters went ahead, and the tow loads of crowded men started for the main landings on beaches V, W, and X. It was now light, and the haze on Sed El Bahr was clearing away so that those in charge of the boats could see what they were doing. Had they attempted an attack in the dark on those unsurveyed beaches among the fierce and dangerous tide rips, the loss of life would have been very great. As it was, the exceeding fierceness of the currents added much to the difficulty and danger of the task. We will take the landings in succession. The landing at V Beach near Sed El Bahr. The men told off for this landing were the Dublin Fusiliers, the Munster Fusiliers, half a battalion of the Hampshire Regiment, and the West Riding Field Company. 3 companies of the Dublin Fusiliers were to land from towed lighters, the rest of the party from a tramp steamer, the Collier River Clyde. This ship, a conspicuous sea mark at Cape Helles throughout the rest of the campaign, had been altered to carry and land troops. Great gangways or entry ports had been cut in her sides on the level of her between decks, and platforms had been built out upon her sides below these, so that men might run from her in a hurry. The plan was to beach her as near the shore as possible, and then drag or sweep the lighters, which she towed, into position between her and the shore, so as to make a kind of boat bridge from her to the beach. When the lighters were so moored as to make this bridge, the entry ports were to be opened, the waiting troops were to rush out onto the external platforms, run from them onto the lighters, and so to the shore. The ship's upper deck and bridge were protected with boilerplate and sandbags, and a casement for machine guns was built upon her forecastle so that she might reply to the enemy's fire. 5 picket boats, each towing 5 boats or launches full of men, steamed alongside the River Clyde and went ahead when she grounded. She took the ground rather to the right of the little beach, some 400 yards from the ruins of Sed El Bar Castle, before the Turks had opened fire, but almost as she grounded, when the picket boats with their tows were ahead of her, only 20 or 30 yards from the beach, every rifle and machine gun in the castle, the town above it, and in the curved, low, strongly trenched hill along the bay, began a murderous fire upon ship and boats. There was no question of their missing. They had their target on the front and both flanks at ranges between 100 and 300 yards in clear daylight. 30 boats bunched together and crammed with men in a good big ship. The first outbreak of fire made the bay as white as a rapid, for the Turks fired not less than 10,000 shots a minute for the first few minutes of that attack. Those not killed in the boats at the first discharge jumped overboard to wade or swim ashore. Many were killed in the water. Many who were wounded were swept away and drowned. Others, trying to swim in the fierce current, were drowned by the weight of their equipment, but some reached the shore, and these instantly doubled out to cut the wire entanglements and were killed or dashed for the cover of a bank of sand or raised beach which runs along the curve of the bay. Those very few who reached this cover were out of immediate danger, but they were only a handful. The boats were destroyed where they grounded. Meanwhile, the men of the River Clyde tried to make their bridge of boats by sweeping the lighters into position and mooring them between the ship and the shore. They were killed as they worked, but others took their places. The bridge was made, and some of the monsters dashed along it from the ship and fell in heaps as they ran. As a second company followed, the moorings of the lighters broke or were shot. The men leaped into the water and were drowned or killed, or reached the beach and were killed, or fell wounded there and lay under fire, getting wound after wound till they died. Very, very few reached the sandbank. More brave men jumped aboard the lighters to remake the bridge. They were swept away or shot to pieces. The average life on those boats was some 3 minutes long, but they remade the bridge, and the third company of the Munsters doubled down to death along it under a storm of shrapnel which scarcely a man survived. The big guns in Asia were now shelling the River Clyde, and the hell of rapid fire never paused. More men tried to land, headed by Brigadier General Napier, who was instantly killed, with nearly all his followers. Then for long hours the remainder stayed on board, down below in the grounded steamer, while the shots beat on her plates with a rattling clang which never stopped. Her 12 machine guns fired back, killing any Turk who showed, but nothing could be done to support the few survivors of the landing, who now lay under cover of the sandbank on the other side of the beach. It was almost certain death to try to leave the ship, but all through the day men leaped from her, with leave or without it, to bring water or succor to the wounded on the boats or beach. 100 brave men gave their lives thus. Every man there earned the cross that day. A boy earned it by one of the bravest deeds of the war, leaping into the sea with a rope in his teeth to try to secure a drifting lighter. The day passed thus, but at nightfall the Turks' fire paused, and the men came ashore from the River Clyde almost unharmed. They joined the survivors on the beach and at once attacked the old fort and the village above it. These works were strongly held by the enemy. All had been ruined by the fire from the fleet, but in the rubble and ruin of old masonry there were thousands of hidden riflemen backed by machine guns. Again and again they beat off our attacks, for there was a bright moon and they knew the ground, and our men had to attack uphill over wire and broken earth and heaped stones and all the wreck and confusion and strangeness of war at night in a new place. Some of the Dublins and Munsters went astray in the ruins and were wounded far from their fellows and so lost. The Turks became more daring after dark. While the light lasted, they were checked by the River Clyde's machine guns, but at midnight they gathered unobserved and charged. They came right down onto the beach, and in the darkness and moonlight much terrible and confused fighting followed. Many were bayoneted, many shot. There was wild firing and crying, and then the Turk attack melted away, and their machine guns began again. When day dawned, the survivors of the landing party were crouched under the shelter of the sandbank. They had had no rest. Most of them had been fighting all night. All had landed across the corpses of their friends. No retreat was possible, nor was it dreamed of, but to stay there was hopeless. Lieutenant Colonel Doughty Wiley gathered them together for an attack. The fleet opened a terrific fire upon the ruins of the fort and village, and the landing party went forward again, fighting from bush to bush and from stone to stone, till the ruins were in their hands. Shells still fell among them. Single Turks, lurking under cover, sniped them and shot them, but the landing had been made good, and V Beach was secured to us. This was the worst and the bloodiest of all the landings. End of section 3.